Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. This is meeting number 38 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, Thursday, December 1st, 2016. And I remind everyone that we are televised today, so I would encourage you to, which I haven't done yet, to shut your cell phones off or mute them so that they aren't disrupting the meeting later. This afternoon, we are beginning our hearings on the fall 2016 reports of the Auditor General of Canada. Appearing before us this afternoon, we have from the Auditor General's Office of Canada, Mr. Michael Ferguson, the Auditor General of Canada. He's accompanied by a number of his principals, Gordon Stock, Carol McCalla, Jean Goulet, and Richard Dominga. They're all available to respond to questions from members of Parliament on our committee. And so I would invite our Auditor General, Mr. Ferguson, to proceed with his opening statement. Welcome here.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to present my Fall 2016 reports, which were tabled in the House of Commons this past Tuesday. The reports provide the findings of 7 audits and 3 special examinations. I'm accompanied by Gordon Stock, Richard Domingue, Carol McCullough, and Jean Goulet. Many of the issues we've raised in these audits, we've also raised in the past. We see government programs that aren't designed to help those who have to navigate them, programs where the focus is more on what civil servants are doing than on what citizens are getting, where delivery times are long, where data is incomplete, and where public reporting doesn't provide a clear picture of what departments have done. These recurrent problems create increased frustration for individual citizens. Parlons d'abord de notre audit de plan d'action.
Let's begin with our audit of the Beyond the Border Action Plan, where we found that some initiatives have produced little value and that obstacles could limit the impact of others. For example, several departments spent almost $80 million on a system to let importers submit customs information electronically. This system has been in place for more than a year, and it is used to process less than 1% of shipments entering Canada.
Border Service Agency spent $53 million on a system to track who's entering and leaving the country. However, the agency can't make full use of it because it can't legally share travelers' information with the United States. The governments of Canada and the United States launched the action plan in 2011 to enhance border security and speed up travel and trade. The plan was ambitious, comprising 34 initiatives with an initial deadline of 3 years. Nous avons constaté que les organisations
We found that the organizations involved could show some progress for the almost $600 million they have spent. For example, the Canadian Air Transport Security Authority was using new baggage screening technology at 7 Canadian airports. However, there is still significant work to be done before the government achieves value for the more than $1 billion allocated to this action plan. Let us now turn to our audit of tax objections. The Income Tax Act is complex, and taxpayers often disagree with the Canada Revenue Agency's interpretation of the Act. Our audit found that the agency took too long to decide whether a taxpayer's objection was right. For example, it took more than 5 years to resolve 79,000 cases worth almost $4 billion.
Time frame for a decision on straightforward files was about 5 months. For medium complexity files, the agency told taxpayers they could expect to wait up to a year before even hearing from an appeals officer. Furthermore, the agency's performance targets didn't consider timeliness from the point of view of the taxpayer. For example, the agency didn't count days that a file spent waiting for an appeals officer to be assigned. Overall, we found that in 65% of objections, the agency ruled in whole or in part in favor of the taxpayer. However, the agency rarely used these results to improve future decisions. In our audit of the Correctional Service of Canada, we found that as the Indigenous offender population grows, the Correctional Service can't provide them with the rehabilitation programs they need when they need them. More than 3/4 of Indigenous offenders were sent to medium or maximum security institutions. From these institutions, most couldn't access the programs they needed for their rehabilitation before the earliest possible date they became eligible for parole. As a result, the Correctional Service prepares Indigenous offenders for parole hearings less often than non-Indigenous offenders. Nous avons constaté que les
We found that 2/3 of released Indigenous offenders had never been on parole. Half of them moved directly from medium or maximum security institutions back into the community, which means they had less time to benefit from a gradual and structured release. Indigenous offenders are caught in a vicious circle. Most do not get timely access to the programs that they need, and because they have not completed a rehabilitation program, they do not get released on parole as early as they could. Let's turn now to another First Nations issue. In 2007, the federal government committed to a new process called Justice at Last to try to resolve long-standing specific claims. Those specific claims often relate to the administration of reserve lands. The government wanted to resolve specific claims fairly and transparently, preferably through negotiations. It also wanted to resolve the claims faster, to provide justice for First Nations and certainty for government, industry, and all Canadians. However, some reforms have in fact created barriers that have prevented First Nations and the federal government from resolving claims.
in Northern Affairs Canada changed its negotiation practices without consulting First Nations. It also significantly reduced its funding to First Nations to research and negotiate their claims. These changes made claim resolution more difficult. The Department was aware of these barriers but didn't address them. The Department publicly reported that the 2007 reforms were a success. However, in our view, most of the settlements used to support this assertion were either resolved or close to being resolved before Justice at Last was implemented. In fact, since 2008, almost as many claims were closed without resolution as were resolved. Now I want to address our audit of motor vehicle safety. Through its oversight of the motor vehicle safety regulations, its monitoring of public complaints and vehicle recalls, and its investigations into alleged defects, Transport Canada plays an important role in keeping passenger vehicles safe. However, we found that Transport Canada hasn't kept the regulations up to date, so the Department is lagging behind the pace of changing technologies. For example, the regulations don't allow vehicles to be equipped with software-operated advanced headlights, but semi-autonomous vehicles controlled by unregulated software are currently on Canadian roads. It can take Transport Canada more than 10 years to update its regulations. Étant donné l'approche prise par Transport Canada,
This means that Transport Canada's approach to setting vehicle standards could prevent Canadians from having access to some safety technologies available in other markets. We also found that Transport Canada, generally, did not consult stakeholders other than manufacturers about proposed regulations. And Transport Canada did not actively gather information from manufacturers about their investigations into vehicle safety defects. In the first of two audits relating to the military, we looked at recruitment and retention in the Canadian Armed Forces. We found the forces did not have the right number of trained members in the right occupations so that Canada can meet its national and international military commitments. 4 years ago, the regular force was about 2,000 trained members below the number it needed. And at the end of our audit, we found that it's short-handed by 4,000. In 2016, there were 21 military occupations that were significantly understaffed, and there were 23 with high attrition rates. National Defence must understand its staffing challenges and tailor its recruiting and retention approaches by occupation.
The recruiting process fit its own needs and not those of applicants. On average, it took 200 days to enroll a recruit. In some cases, the recruiting group closed the file of an applicant who was still interested in enrolling. This meant that the Canadian Armed Forces lost some qualified candidates. We found these same problems in 2002 and 2006. We believe that without significant changes to recruiting, it's unlikely the regular force will reach its target of 68,000 members by 2018-2019. Turning to the second of our military-related audits, National Defence depends on having equipment available in good working condition when they need it. Costs to operate and maintain military equipment can be more than twice the cost of buying it, and if National Defence doesn't manage support costs properly, the equipment may not be available or its life may be shortened. We found that when National Defence decided to buy major military equipment, it used poor planning assumptions about support costs, how it would use the equipment, and how many personnel it needed to operate and maintain the equipment. This means that National Defence paid for services that it couldn't use. De plus, la Défense nationale.
In addition, National Defence assumed that the cost to support new equipment would be no more than the cost to support the replaced equipment. However, we found that the maintenance costs for the new Hercules airplane were actually $7,000 more per flying hour than for the airplane it replaced. National Defence needs to better align its equipment support, including personnel, operating costs and maintenance resources, with its life cycle planning of how that equipment will actually be used. This brings me to the reports of our 3 special examinations. In the case of the Pacific Pilotage Authority, we are satisfied that the corporation had good control of its resources and activities. However, we made recommendations in 7 areas where we felt improvements were needed.
Research Centre, we found that the Centre's ability to conduct business was significantly at risk because it didn't have enough board members. This problem persisted for at least 3 years, although recent appointments should now help. As for the Atlantic Pilotage Authority, it experienced a number of significant problems, ranging from the lack of strategic direction to its inability to confirm that its pilots and boat crews continuously met skill and safety requirements. To close, I want to go back to my earlier remarks about the frustration of citizens with government programs. One way or another, everything the government does is intended to serve Canadians. As such, departments should do service well to benefit Canadians both individually and collectively. Comme je l'ai mentionné, il n'y a rien de nouveau.
As I mentioned, there is nothing new about the issues we found in these most recent audits. We have seen many of these problems before, and in some cases they are getting worse. It often takes departments too long to deliver, such as in the case of Canada Revenue Agency, making decisions about tax objections. Public reporting is not very good. Sometimes it is incomplete or even inaccurate, as we found in our audits of the Beyond the Border Action Plan or the resolution of First Nations specific claims.
For the money they've spent. such as National Defence Support contracts for military equipment or the implementation of initiatives under the Beyond the Border Action Plan. It's critical for government departments to understand that their services need to be built around citizens, not process. As they work to implement our recommendations, I encourage them to take a step back and focus on how they can deliver services that work for Canadians. Monsieur le Président, je termine ainsi ma déclaration d'ouverture.
Mr. Chair, that concludes my opening statement. We will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Mr. Ferguson, for that statement, and also for your report that you filed or that you tabled earlier this week. We'll now move into our first round of questions, and we'll move to Monsieur Lefebvre. Monsieur Lefebvre, vous avez 7 minutes.
Merci.
Mr. Lefebvre, you have 7 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ferguson, I'd like to congratulate you on your excellent work. These reports are coming at the right time. And I'd like to thank you for taking the time to establish your own report on the 5 previous years on government bureaucracy. To somebody who's just arrived here at the House of Commons, it's interesting to see your suggestions and recommendations for improving democracy. What I really liked is that you're not pointing the finger at the people who are working with us, but you have tangible suggestions. And there again, I'd very much like to thank you. There's a report that I find really quite shocking, and I'd like us to talk about it. In national defence, we see problems that come back. With Indigenous peoples, we see problems that come back. There's no improving from year to year, and it's outrageous that nothing happens.
So this is the message from the Auditor General, page 4, where you talk about the Canada's Indigenous people. And you say that your predecessor, Sheila Fraser, near the end of her mandate, summed up her impression of 10 years of audits and related recommendations on First Nations issues with the word unacceptable. And since your arrival, we have continued to audit these issues and to present at least 1 report per year on areas that have an impact on First Nations, including emergency management, policing, services, on reserves, access to health services, and most recently correctional services. And when you add the results of these audits to those we reported on in the past, I can only describe the situation as it exists now as beyond unacceptable. So we had unacceptable before, and now we're beyond unacceptable. I'd like to get from you your sense of, I know if for the past 10 years, we have not been able to, and even before that, I'm not saying this is past 10 years, this goes back, there's a systemic problem here in dealing and addressing First Nations concern. As the committee does its work here, what suggestions or what can you share with us of how we can do better to try to change that culture and try to get to that systemic problem that exists in the system?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think, you know, as it relates to the issues with services on First Nations, really what we've been focusing on is just for the departments to deliver the services that they themselves have said they need to deliver. All right, so we're not trying to take it any further than that. I think even if you look at the audit that we have, you know, in these audits on the specific claims process, the Justice at Last program, and you see that the department decided to change the process without negotiating or without consulting with the First Nations. I mean, that's one of the primary things that the Department of Indigenous and Northern Affairs should be doing, is consulting. You know, when they reduce the budget so that the First Nations don't have the money to research the claims, you know, they set limits on the amount of the loan. They don't share all the information. They set up the mediation services within the department itself, which meant the First Nations didn't have faith that those mediation services were going to be independent. So for me, it's just a matter of, I don't know about fixing all of these problems, but I know the departments could do the things that they have set out for themselves to do, and that would be the first step on the road to getting better services for First Nations.
Thank you, and I agree with you. In your conclusion at page 5, you make an observation, which is where you say that the parliamentary committees play a crucial role, and you suggest that, given the fact that every year there are many reports from your office that is produced, and that I'm not even sure if a lot of these committees are aware that the Auditor Generals, I'm sure they are, but and then do they actually use them? And I think as a committee, from your suggestion, that we use our audit reports not just to understand what has happened, but also to make sure that changes take place. I suggest that with that suggestion, Auditor General, I think we should share. Anytime we have a report from the Auditor General, and we also provide a report from this committee, we should share it with our colleagues with which committee that reflects on. So thank you for that suggestion. I thought that was something that we could, that's how we can improve internally as well between committees. I'll pass over to Madame Mendez. We'll say a few words. Again, merci beaucoup. Beau travail. J'ai hâte de rentrer dans les documents.
Thank you again. Excellent work, and I can't wait to get into these reports so that I can put the questions to where they need to be put. Thank you. I'd like to thank you as well for being here today. Just to follow up on what my colleague just said, what's most important to us as a Public Accounts Committee is to understand what happened, yes, to hold the government accountable for what it has done in the past, and also to ensure that departments learn from your recommendations. What matters is not just having a report or having a plan. What matters is learning from your recommendation. The most important thing we have to take away is that obsession with procedures is the worst possible thing we can do for our fellow citizens. What matters isn't procedure, but the services that we deliver. I imagine that you have compared the public service in Canada with other public services in the Commonwealth, in Commonwealth countries and elsewhere. Do others have similar problems? The only example of this kind of situation that we identified in our audits was the Canada Revenue Agency. We identified about 4 years ago in the United Kingdom. They completed a study on objections, and we noted that Canada's revenue agency took 4 times longer than other countries that were part of the study. So it's not the kind of thing we can do. We can't conduct such comparisons with every audit, but occasionally we can. And when we can, and did, we identified the problem with decisions on taxpayer objections.
We'll now move to the opposition side, and we'll go to Mr. McColman, please, for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Auditor General and your principals for being here today. I want to address a couple of questions about the report on the CRA and income tax, and then I want to take some time after that to perhaps try to articulate my 8 years of service here as a member of Parliament relative to my frame of reference, which was being a small businessman for 25 years. So allow me to do that afterwards. But on the time it takes for citizens to get decisions on their objections, you had mentioned in another venue that this may be, when asked the question, is this a person power or a manpower issue? Is this an issue that they don't have enough people working, and so that hence, the backlog results as from that? Or is that part of the issue? And I'd like you to expand on that for me and do it publicly in this environment here.
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, I'll refer to paragraph 2.33 in that audit. And in there, we point out the fact that that the rate of growth of the number of new objections far outpaced the increase in resources at the agency dedicated to managing them. In the past 10 years, the inventory of outstanding income tax objections increased by 171%, while the number of employees dedicated to resolving these objections increased by 14%. So there definitely is a certain component of this that is to do with resourcing, but I think, and if you look at Exhibit 2.5 in the audit, at above paragraph 2.76, you'll see things like in 33% of the cases, it was that the taxpayer had to provide new facts that were not asked for at the assessment or reassessment stage. 28% of the time, the information was already on file at the Canada Revenue Agency, but they didn't recognize it at that point in time. 8% of the time, the Canada Revenue Agency improperly applied the facts, the law, or the policy. So, yes, there's a certain component related to resourcing, but I think that there's a lot of things that the Canada Revenue Agency can do itself just to improve its process. One of those things would be just learning the lessons from later decisions when one of their assessments or reassessments is overturned, learning those lessons and building that back into their process. So I think there's a lot they can do even within the resources they have.
Thank you for that answer. I think every member of Parliament could probably attest, and I'll speak for myself, to the fact that I have a full-time person in my constituency office, and that person probably 60 to 70% of their time is working on CRA interventions because people come to our counter or they call us and they're trying to resolve something that's happening at CRA. And the debriefing of those situations that I sometimes do with my staff person exposes this problem. I know the problems. I know this is anecdotal by talking about, the Brantford Member of Parliament's office. But let me tell you that this is something that we see every day. We see it. My staff sees it in terms of the customer. I use the word customer because, but the unfriendliness and the barriers that are put up, often for no good reason, the duplication of work, the many things that happen along the way, the change of a file going from one desk to another desk, these things must, it was mentioned earlier, we're not going to point the finger. At a certain point, we must point the finger. Not at a particular individual, not at one of the senior managers, but we need to point the finger at the processes that they are doing, which absolutely frustrate Canadians day after day after day when they're dealing with agencies. I said this on an earlier meeting, that if a survey was done, I would suspect, of Canadians who've dealt with government bureaucracy, the people who are inside government, about their issues, and you did a satisfaction survey of how satisfied, what was your experience like, I suspect you're going to find that it's not very high because of the frustrations that I've seen over the years. CRA is one of them. We have other ones here. We hope to study them all. But going back to what you provided for us in your report this time, which is your message of observation since you've been in this role about halfway through your mandate. I see it as kind of a window of opportunity, and I'd like to ask you publicly, do you see this as a window of opportunity to expose kind of from the 30,000-foot level the kind of cultural change that we should be driving towards in terms of government services being provided in a what I call customer-friendly way, citizen-friendly way, versus the way it is today?
I think, Mr. Chair, that's the crux of the message that I've been trying to deliver, is that the services need to be built around the citizen, not built around the process. I think that there's a role for sort of us all to play, right? As Auditor General, we will continue to bring these things forward, and I think the audit that we've done on the Canada Revenue Agency shows that you know, even though, as you mentioned, it may be anecdotal, but the audit shows that it isn't just anecdotal, that there are systemic issues around this. We have another audit underway right now at the Canada Revenue Agency looking at how they handle calls through their customer call center. So we are going to continue to look at the issue of customer service through the Canada Revenue Agency. And then, of course, right, there's a role, a very important role for this committee, which we talked about earlier, and for other committees at the House of Commons and the Senate to help make sure that the departments are getting the message that they need to improve these services so that they are delivered from the point of view of the citizen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson. We'll now move to Mr. Christopherson, please, for 7 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Ferguson and your staff. Another fantastic job on behalf of Canadians done by your department. Like Mr. Lefebvre, I want to spend just a few minutes of my opening time talking about your message. We don't receive those very often. It's somewhat outside the normal procedure. And I thought it was interesting, given the impact of your predecessor's final message, and you've picked up on that. And I must say that someone who was here before and after, for us, it's been seamless going from one fantastic Auditor General to another. And so this message is resonating with this committee. You note that you're halfway into your term, and this is a reflection of some of your observations. It's also timely because we're just a little over 1 year into a new majority government who has publicly committed themselves to doing things different. So it's a great opportunity to visit these things. I did think it was interesting, the quote you used when you said, in terms of the audits and what's going on, that in the immortal words of Yogi Berra, I attributed them to you in the news clip. It was actually you attributing it to you, but take the credit while you can, you know. And you said deja vu all over again. And that is exactly what it seems to be like, particularly when we're now seeing more and more repetition of audit findings that are similar. And we've been on this over and over, but we're getting a bigger buildup of case study that shows that this is the case. It's the one and done. As long as the departments can get through the immediate public scrutiny when you launch your report and when we hold a hearing, if they can get through that, they're pretty much into safe waters. And our goal is to work with you to ensure that that doesn't happen, that we hold more focus on these things. So one of the things that you mentioned over and over again, and you already commented on it, but we've got to keep drilling it down, is to do service well. And I'd like you again just to talk about how you think government is too much looking at measuring how well they're doing their internal steps, and not enough measurement from the point of view of citizens. And I completely agree with Mr. McColman that not only on Canada Revenue, but on most areas where there's interaction with government, there's great frustration. People feeling like they just don't matter, they're lost in the system. And that's why they come to us. Can you help me cut through all this? So again, just that refocusing that you think needs to take place. How does that happen? I assume it starts with the ministers and deputy ministers and works its way through, but how do you see you and us working together to bring about that cultural change, that the view of success is how well are things being delivered for the actual citizen rather than how well did we check off our internal boxes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think we have now started that work, and Mr. Chair, I'm quite happy to be on record as saying that I think the work that this committee has done over the last, whatever it is, year and a half, has been exactly the way that a Public Accounts Committee should be working, and that I think that the committee has taken on the task of holding the departments accountable and making sure that they are going to actually implement and make progress. you know, not just on saying they agree with our results, not just on bringing forward an action plan, but actually being able to show that the results are getting better for Canadians. So, you know, absolutely, as I think I've said before, you know, there are multiple players in this. We have a role in the Office of the Auditor General to keep bringing the audits forward. This committee and other committees have a role to play in holding the departments accountable for actually delivering better on services, not just talking about our recommendations or how they're going to deal with our recommendations, but how is it that what they are going to do is actually going to make things better. The government as a whole has a responsibility to keep setting the tone on this, that it's their expectation that these results are going to get better for individual citizens, and then it's very much the department's responsibility to make sure they understand that and that they are implementing and measuring their performance from the point of view of understanding, you know, what it is that the citizen experiences when that citizen tries to navigate those government programs.
Very good. And I don't think I'm telling, 2 minutes, thanks. I don't think I'm telling tales at a school when I say that we are actively considering responding in kind. In the 12 years that I've been on this committee, we've never responded directly to an Auditor General message, and we're looking at doing that and taking action to give that as much heightened attention as we can too, to show that it really is an Auditor General public accounts system, that the two go hand in hand, that there's a partnership in making these changes. So thank you for your leadership, and it's our intent to hold up our end of the system and to respond in kind by shoring up your macro messaging that you've brought halfway through your term. I've only got a moment left, but I'll turn to one specific in these reports, and they're pretty devastating. This is a pretty devastating round of reports. But I'm also concerned that we're getting to the point in some of these, the reporting from government, where, my words, but it's borderline misleading Parliament in terms of the cherry picking of what is reported. I want to, the submarines, for example, and I'd like you to just quickly, if you would, in a nutshell, give us what the government told us about submarines and their readiness and availability versus what you actually found when you studied their own numbers in national defense. If you would, please, and Chair, obviously I'll conclude with that. Thank you.
So I'll just do a high level and then pass it to Mr. Stock if I can. So at the high level, the government reported that the submarines were available 100% of the time, when in fact their own internal numbers showed that they were only available 42% of the time. But I'll ask Mr. Stock to give you more detail.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Within the reports that National Defence provides Parliament, in the Departmental Performance Report, they said that there was no requirement to actually provide this specific information. But since the information was there, we audited it to make sure that it was verifiable. The numbers of the submarines are accumulated with other types of vessels and divided into East Coast and West Coast. So you don't actually see within the Departmental Performance Report the actual results for the submarines or for other major pieces of equipment. And how they put it together and how they got to the 100% was that it was beyond what they expected to provide. So that they used the 100% figure, aggregated it with other types of vessels to be able to provide the overall number that was then provided to Parliament. So from the starting point, we thought that it was misleading from the perspective that it is including a number that is not what their own number was, and not providing the information that Parliament would need to be able to assess the progress and the performance of the department.
Thank you, Mr. Stock. We'll move back to Ms. Shanahan, please.
Much, Chair, and thank you very much, Auditor General, for being here with your panel. And I know that we're going to have ample opportunity in the months to come to study each one of these reports. At least I think that's the intention of this committee, and I look forward to doing so. We've discussed on previous occasions together just what should we be looking at when we're faced with because as an office, you choose, you have a number of audits going on at any one time, and they sort of come to us as, of course, they're being completed. There's different timelines accorded to them. But when we receive them here, as a member of this committee, I'm looking at really first and foremost what are the reports that represent a direct and personal risk to safety and security of Canadians. And what strikes me here is that we have a number of them that touch on the idea of personal risk, but I am particularly struck by the report number 3, preparing Indigenous offenders for release, Correctional Services Canada. And particularly so because I know we have one of our fellow members that's presenting a private member's bill concerning fetal alcohol syndrome and how there's an overrepresentation of offenders, particularly Indigenous offenders, who have this condition, FASD. So I'd like you to talk to us about that report in a little bit more detail, and really to expand on your concern, as you put it in your message, about this is not the first time that issues like this have come to your attention, and that it is beyond acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I guess I'll start sort of at the back end of this issue, which is that more than 50% of Indigenous offenders, when they are released from federal penitentiaries, they're coming out of either medium or maximum security institutions. They're coming out at their statutory release date, which is 2/3 into their sentence. So that means they have only that 1/3 of their sentence to be under supervision. So the Department, Correctional Service Canada, is not preparing them for parole early in their sentence. And if they were being prepared for parole, then they would be able to come out in a more gradual, supervised way to make that transition back into the community. One thing to remember is, in order for an offender to get parole, they need to have at least gotten down into a minimum security facility, right? But what's happening is these people are not being prepared. They're not getting their courses, their correctional programming in a timely manner. So they're not being prepared for parole. Many of them are staying at those higher level security institutions. So when they come out, they're coming out from medium or maximum security, more than 50% of them, right back into the community with that shorter period of time under supervision. It starts, though, right from the very beginning when they come in the door, because there's certain pieces of information that the Correctional Service has said that they need in order to be able to assign the right level of security to a particular offender, and they're not getting all of that information. In fact, we found through a sample of 45 files that we looked at, only in one case was it clear that they had received all of the information that they should have received to be able to make that assessment. Then what they do is they have a tool that they use, to assign the individual to a security level, but also to assign correctional programming to that individual. But the tool was only designed for assigning a level of security. It wasn't a tool that was built for dealing with what's the right programming for an offender, particularly an Indigenous offender with, sort of the different cultural and Aboriginal social history. So right from the very beginning, they may be assigned to a higher level of security than necessary. They may be assigned to more programming than necessary, and the programs don't start on time. So therefore, they're not getting prepared for parole. And I think the numbers were only 31% of them are prepared for parole, compared to 48% of non-Indigenous offenders at that earliest possible date that they're eligible for parole.
So we clearly have a lot more questions on that report. Thank you, Auditor General. 2 minutes. So just on the back to the message, it seems to me that we're at a point now that there's your call for government to start looking at how the services are delivered to Canadians, and that there needs to be better control of data. Data integrity is something that's come up before. I'm I'm wondering, it's really where it seemed to be at a point we need to sort of look at how we deliver government in a different way. And I would just like to have your opinion on what are the kinds of tools that government should be looking at to be able to do so. More interdepartmental cohesion. We know the Treasury Board has a project now about aligning the estimates, the budgets and the estimates process. Can you talk to us about that?
Well, I think, you know, in what I've seen over the last 5 years, I think what ends up happening, and in some ways, you know, we have probably partly contributed to this, right? Because what we will do in a number of our audits is we will tell departments that they should have ways of measuring whether they've got success in their programs. So what we actually find out that happens, I think, is a lot of times government departments will put in place measures to measure their performance, but they put in place a measure that around something that's easy to measure. Okay, so they don't put something in place that measures the process from beginning to end, taking into account the experience of the citizen. They measure a piece of the process that's easy to measure. So again, if you look at the Canada Revenue Agency audit here on income tax objections, they do track how much time their agents have to spend on a file on an income tax objection. And in fact, you can see in the audit that they set standards for it. But the standards are for their agent to work a file anywhere from 4 hours for the easiest files to 28 hours for the most complex files. And they monitor that, how much time the agent is spending. But it's just totally disproportionate to what the individual citizen is going through, because on those most complex files that they say their standard for their agent is 28 hours, we said that the taxpayer could be waiting over 900 days to get an answer. So they're not measuring the process from the point of view of how long is this person waiting. Yes, they're measuring a little piece of the process to help them understand what's going on there, but it's not getting them to the fact of realizing that, you know, we're making people wait around too long for these decisions, and we need to figure out how to do a better job on that.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. We'll now move back to Monsieur Gaudin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le vérificateur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ferguson, and thank you to the team with you today. Thank you for being here. The reports that you've tabled are extremely valuable to us, and they're helping us do our work. I have to congratulate you today. I very much liked what you said in the media. We have the same goals. What we want to do is improve the systems, and you are taking part in that, and you're contributing to our work and helping us move forward. As a parliamentarian, and I've been here a year, just over, I need support. We observe things, we see things, and as you said, here's one article, the Auditor General is tired of saying the same thing and wants results. That's how I feel. I think you're used to the comments that I make when I hear new witnesses on some reports. I always say the same thing. We see that there are problems. If you don't have the Auditor General coming in, you'll have another audit-free year. More time will go by, and you'll hope that we'll forget about you. I think there's an existential problem here, a philosophical problem, if you will. You said departments have to understand that services have to be built around the citizen and not around process. You said that, and my colleague said something similar. We're not trying to attack officials here or individuals. People are working in good faith. Our federal officials are people we should raise our hats to because they do great work. But above and beyond that, I think we'll need to scrap the model where we're serving process and forgetting citizens. We have an example of that with the CRA report. Could you please give me your views on whether it's an approach problem? Well, perhaps it's a problem that's been in place for several years. So it's not a new problem. It is, however, becoming one aspect of a broader government problem. I don't think it's a philosophical issue as such. I think it's something that's built into the fabric of the machinery of government and into the way programs work. And there again, I think that departments can improve service if they focus on the citizen experience. So in my view, and that's why we prepared the Auditor General's message, in my view, it really is possible for departments to change their performance, do things better if they can find a different way of examining the process and the programs, reviewing their programs and focusing on them from the citizen's point of view. Do you have any proposed solutions? Are there any instruments we can use? In the parliamentary process, I haven't quite taken in the whole procedural Bible yet, but as parliamentarians, as a parliamentarian on the Public Accounts Committee, can we do more than we're doing now to ask governments to be both accountable and responsible and to produce results? I think yes. For example, we identified a number of problems with public reporting by departments. So I think it's important that members of this committee, regarding those reports, ask questions. Ask questions about those reports, about whether they're complete, about whether they are accurate. That might be one way of doing it. It's also important for you to ask questions about action plans. When a department presents an action plan designed to solve problems we've identified, that's another opportunity for members of this committee to put the questions that are direct. You can ask the department directly to identify whether it really is possible to put in place all the measures that are set out in the action plan, and whether those measures will actually lead to the desired results or the expected results. As parliamentarians, we ask questions, yes, but is there something else we can do, something more we can do to require results? I believe that, once again, it's a matter of putting pressure on departments. It's important to carry on and ensure that departments understand that there are requirements. And those requirements mean that they have to change their processes and change the way that they provide services to Canadians. I think it's just a matter of continuing to ask questions, continue to set expectations. And with this kind of case, I think that results can be improved. Thank you.
Mr. Chen, please.
Very much, and thank you to the Auditor General and to his department for being here today and speaking to our committee. I want to talk about the income tax objections and your report on Canada Revenue Agency, and I want to highlight some of the things that I found and then ask a question in terms of what you looked into with respect to the process of objections. And I can tell you that I know how challenging it is for constituents that have come to my office that have had to wait for months. And in your report, you highlight that indeed some Canadians are waiting not just months, but years or over a decade for a particular objection to be resolved. And it's quite disheartening to hear that lack of service being provided to our taxpayers, particularly when we do have a taxpayer's Bill of Rights that gives Canadians specifically 16 rights that are centered around accuracy, professionalism, courteousness, and fairness. And so when we end up having a taxpayer who files an objection and then perhaps then is not successful, they end up having to pay potentially interest, sometimes hundreds of dollars in interest. And we've seen over the past decade that these objections have more than doubled, almost tripled during that time period. So in your report, you say that objections were not being processed in a timely way. You specifically say that the CRA didn't adequately analyze or review decisions, and at the same time that there was, quote, insufficient sharing of the results of these objections and court decisions within the agency. So there is, of course, in any department, there's policy, there's procedure, there's the practice of what happens. And when we look at the objections process itself, I note that in the beginning of your report, where you outline the objections process on page 1 of report 2, you talk about how CRA manages its process through the appeals branch of the department. However, at the same time, I'm aware that taxpayers can also file complaints around service, and they can do that first through the CRA, and then through, if they are not satisfied with the results of that complaint, they can in fact go to the taxpayer's ombudsman. So my question is, did you have a chance to review what happens at that level with the taxpayer's ombudsman, how effective they were or were not in terms of helping clients, in terms of helping taxpayers get their issues resolved in a timely, fair, and accurate way? Because I know it's been a conversation. I previously sat on the Immigration Committee, and I know that in speaking to colleagues, people have talked about the idea of an immigration ombudsman. I'm wondering if you had a chance to look at that concept of how it's working within CRA and whether or not it's helping. And I suspect many of the objectives of an ombudsman would be similar to the type of inquiries you are making into how effective the department is running and how well they are serving Canadians.
Thank you. No, we did not look at the role of the ombudsman. You know, again, when we scope these audits, we scope whatever into them that we feel we can get done in the time frame. But certainly, you know, we did look at things like the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights that you mentioned. I mean, we identified that, and particularly the right to receive timely information. But we identified that the Canada Revenue Agency, you know, hadn't really defined what would be timely information. And you know, I think you also referred to sort of the policies and the procedures and the practices. But one of the things that's missing, I think, and you referenced it in your comments, is the continuous improvement side of it for the Canada Revenue Agency, learning from the decisions. And it may be decisions coming out of the Ombudsman's office, or decisions coming out of tax court, or decisions coming out of overturning decisions on through the objections process, using that information to go back and improve the policies, procedures, practices, and all of that's getting to a decision. So the direct answer in terms of the Ombudsman is no, we didn't look at that. But we have lots of other opportunities to go into Canada Revenue Agency.
So knowing what you know and what you found in terms of cases not being processed in a timely way, were you able to look at any data that examined how some taxpayers might have resorted to the Ombudsman and whether or not that was effective in getting their case more timely resolved? Was there any consideration of what the current avenues are for Canadians to get their cases processed in a more timely way?
Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, and again, I think the process that we looked at is a sort of a well-defined process in terms of how people get into that objection stream and what happens. So, You know, that was the focus of this particular audit, and we didn't sort of go beyond that into, you know, what might be happening through the Ombudsman's office, you know, because again, this was a well-defined process that we could look at, and that's what we focused on.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Chen, back to Mr. McColman, please. For 5 minutes, we're on the second round, so it's a little shorter round. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Earlier in the week, when I was making notes based on your comments, Auditor General, these are, I'm just going to read you some of the notes from, I believe, what you said. And they're kind of a little bit scattered, but bear with me. There was a struggle in each of the 7 audits, meaning data integrity and information was not good. Services take too long. That's a recurring theme we've talked about today. Problems with training in departments, getting worse. Armed forces, same issues as 2006, problems getting worse. Departments with, quote, no performance indicators. Can you, as Mr. Christopherson, my colleague, said earlier, really when you read these reports, they're pretty scathing in many ways. And so can you take just one of those items, and I'll suggest no performance indicators, meaning no measures of how performance was carried out within the organization. And further to that, perhaps give us your thoughts on, as we move forward, because we're going to address some of these with specific departments when we get them here, but as we get into that process, how can we liaise with you to show us, if you can, I'm not sure you can, whether it's within your mandate to be able to do it, show us some of the best practices of performance indicators that you might have run across in your role as Auditor General.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if your notes were scattered, it was probably because my comments were scattered. But, you know, in terms of the performance indicators, I think what I would do is I would look at the audit we did on the Beyond the Border Action Plan, where there were a series of 34 initiatives. Government departments have spent $600 million, and the total amount that they have dedicated to the action plan is over $1 billion. But what they were reporting on was whether they completed something. Right? Did they build a system? The action plan was all about improving security at the border, speeding up travel and trade at the border. So for a department to say they built a new system doesn't tell you whether the security is any better at the border, and it doesn't tell you whether people and goods are moving faster across the border. So that's the type of thing that we mean when we're looking at the performance indicators. You know, if you're going to put $1 billion into building a number of systems and a number of initiatives, and you have a direct objective of increasing security at the border or speeding up travel and trade at the border, then how can you tell whether those initiatives have actually done those things? And I get it that it's hard, right? I mean, we struggle with it in our own office to say, okay, how do we measure the value of an audit? Right. It's not easy to measure the value of an audit. But I think, you know, we need to at least keep going back and looking at an audit and saying, okay, do we think we have provided value to Parliament and value to the government and whatever from doing this audit, as opposed to just saying, well, what we'll do is we'll measure how long it took us to do an audit, right? Or how much it cost us to do an audit, and then say we've got a measure. Because that measure doesn't get at what is important, which is what's the value coming out of the audit. So, you know, similarly in this type of thing, you know, it's not good enough just to say, well, we'll measure whether we've completed something or not. They have to find ways of saying, you know, I mean, we spent, you know, $80 million on a new system, a single window system to track what's coming into the country, what goods are being imported into the country, but less than 1% of importers are actually using it. And what the department has said is they're going to improve that because they're going to shut down all of the systems and make this one mandatory. Well, making a system mandatory will increase the number of importers that are using it. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have importers who are happy that they are going to have to use it. So how are you going to know whether that is the right step to take, because this is a good system? So it's all of those types of things that I think are our frustration when we look at the performance measurement.
Oh, I'll yield then because.
All right, thank you. You have 15 seconds left. So we'll now move over to Mr. Area, please. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Auditor General. You mentioned that it is critical for government departments that you suggest to them that they work to implement, when they work to implement your recommendations, that you encourage them to take a step back and focus on how they can deliver services that work for Canadians, which is quite important. But do you think the bureaucracy has got the culture to actually do this?
Well, again, I think what's happened, I think some things have creeped into the way that government departments deliver the programs. As I said, sometimes they measure what's easy to measure rather than really finding out what is it that they are trying to achieve. I think that there has been a lot of emphasis on individual steps in procedures rather than, again, on the end results. And we can even see it with things like action plans and the way that departments respond to our recommendations is they'll put together, okay, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and then what they track is whether they have done that without standing back and saying, okay, now that we have done all of that, have we actually made the end result any better or not? No. So I think there's been some things that have crept into the way that the departments have run the programs, but I think if they do take that step back, that they will be capable to do a better job of those things.
I understand what you're suggesting to them. That's very clear to me. But do they understand? I'm sure they understand, they are quite smart. But do they have the culture to actually do what you're suggesting them to do?
Well, I think once they do take that step back and say, yes, okay, we need to look at this in a different way. There are many very competent people working in government departments. And I think once they understand that that is what their mission is to look at these, not as programs centered around process, but programs centered around people. I think that the skill set is there. It's now just a matter of realizing that, okay, we need to change the way we're looking at these programs.
What is that we can do to help them do what you're suggesting them to do?
Well, again, as I've said, I think that this committee in particular has really started to sort of step up to the plate, if you want, and is doing a good job of sending the message to departments that you do expect them to get to better results. So, again, when they're in front of you, yes, look at their action plan. Yes, look at what they're going to do. But I suppose get them to talk about, okay, when they've done all of this, how is that actually going to be able to result in better service? How are they going to be able to show that it will result in better service? I know that we've just sort of landed 7 audits on you and some special exams, and that's going to take a lot of time for you to get through. But if you can within your schedule find time to bring a department back, a year later or whatever, so that the message is out there that it isn't, as it was mentioned before, it isn't going to be a one and done situation. All of those things I think will help.
And coming back to your remark that there's nothing about the issues you have found because you have seen these problems before and they're getting worse. And many a times when the Deputy Minister comes in here, oh, I was not there when that happened. Will it be a good practice for us to, in addition to calling the current Deputy Minister, also call in the Deputy Minister who was in charge of the time when you had done your previous audit, identified something like that?
Actually, I think, Mr. Chair, that it's the responsibility of the people that are running the department right now to get the problem solved. So they are the people that I think I would put the focus on.
And coming to the Beyond the Border Action Plan, you mentioned that several departments spent almost $80 million. However, less than 1% of the shipments entering Canada are using this. what is the capacity of the, they spent $80 million? Is the capacity developed by setting up the process that, say, 50% of the shipments, they can use this and only 1% is using it?
I believe, if I recall correctly, and we do have it in that paragraph in the actual report, I believe the original goal was something like 40% of all shipments within the first year.
Okay.
When in actual fact it was less than 1%. So that was 40% of the shipments within the first year. So again, the intention of this system is that it will be the single window that importers can use to essentially register their shipments with various government departments.
Thank you, Area. We'll now move to Mr. Christofferson. Mr. Christofferson, you have 3 to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I obviously don't have a lot of time. I'll just focus on another example of the growing concern I'm having about the accuracy of what's being reported and, the truthiness of just what we're hearing. And I gave one example with the submarines, and I think that's a pretty stark example of, if not misleading Parliament, about as close as you can get to it without actually crossing the line. In that case, it may actually have crossed the line, and that may be something that we look at too when we're studying that report. But I want to draw your attention, sir, to page 9 in report 6. I'll read to you. You don't need to jump to it. I'll read to you from the report. And it's talking about the rate of claims settlement. Again, the government bragging that they're doing certain things, but when you get in there and have a look, the story's a little bit different. So subs is one example. This may be another good one. For example, you say, quoting, one claim we reviewed was first submitted in 1987. Probably some members here weren't even born then, as I'm getting used to compared to my birth year. However, I digress. One claim was reviewed, was first submitted in 1987, and its processing time was just over 26 years before it was settled. However, the department's database showed that the claim's processing time was just under 5 years. So, again, give me a little bit more context for that, because, again, that looks to me to be about as close to misleading Parliament as you can get, and may indeed actually constitute misleading Parliament. So if you could take just the moments left to give us a bit of the details as you did on the sub-deal. What's happening here? It actually took 26 years. Government bragged it took less than 5. What's the deal?
What happened was when the Justice at Last program came in on the 18th of October 2008, sort of as the first date, the department went back and reset all of the start dates on all of the claims, outstanding claims in their system, and then they were measuring how long did it take them to resolve that under the Justice at Last program. But again, when you look at it, it meant that the information was no longer there really about when was that original start date and how long had this claim been in process. We also mentioned, and there's an exhibit 6.6 just above paragraph 77 in that chapter, that the report from the department said that there were 136 claims, total settlement of $2.260 billion, when actually we found that 89 of those claims for $2.209 billion were either essentially settled under the old process or well down the road. In fact, 28 of them had been settled and compensated before Justice at Last on the 18th of October 2008, but the department included them as settlements under Justice at Last. So if what they were supposed to be doing was letting Parliament know what has been the impact of this new approach, Justice at Last, then what they should have been doing is saying, here's how many claims first came in the door under Justice at Last, and here's what we have done with them, rather than counting all of that overlap period where a lot of work had been done before and saying, okay, we've settled over $2 billion through the Justice at Last program, when the way that we looked at it, we felt that they had actually settled $51 million of claims that had just come in through that approach.
We have a problem. Thank you.
We'll now move to Mr. Sims. Mr. Sims, please.
Tis an honor. Thank you, sir.
Public Accounts Committee, Mr. Sims.
The pleasure is all mine, more than it is yours, trust me. So we'll see how this goes. Thank you. I took great interest with number 5, and I'll tell you why. Several years ago, like in my riding, we have 103 Search and Rescue Squadron under the Canadian military. And there was a rash of problems, including one which was we couldn't find pilots. We just couldn't, you know, so I guess I want to turn to this part of the report because I read it with great interest regarding, get the title, Armed Forces Recruitment and Retention. Simply because, I mean, if we're going to look at buying the next generation fighter jets, I mean, who the hell's going to fly it? Is really the deal. So I noticed some of the stuff here that caused great concern for me. Files were closed in some cases while applicants were still interested. It almost seems like they had a process in place that was not adaptable to the current job market. I mean, if we're chasing after pilots, we have to go far and wide to find these people who have a lot of experience. One thing I do want to point out, though, and this goes to the table that you had here that states, well, the recommendation you made to them was 5.52. Canadian Armed Forces should develop and implement a 3 to 5 year target with an action plan for each occupation to meet recruiting needs. So it's not so much the target numbers that they put out or the revised target numbers. I think there was a 10% of these were just well under that, or no, 10% variance in getting up to their target. Their response was agreed. The Canadian Armed Forces currently uses a 5-year long-range planning model that factors in attrition and growth. The model is then analyzed in detail to produce a strategic intake plan. It almost seems like there's really nothing wrong at all, other than the fact that they acknowledge they should be more agile towards this. So how big is this problem? Because if we're talking about new equipment, and you're also got a part here about maintenance, then there's a huge gap that will lead us to the future. Do they really believe that being a little more agile is going to help?
So I'll ask Mr. Stock to give you the details of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In response to the specific question on the target versus the planning model, they are, in fact, I think, two different things. What we're suggesting within the recommendation is that they have a 3 to 5 year target so that they, within the variation as to whether if they don't get the number that they need within the current year, the next year they should be picking up what they didn't get last year and filling in what they still need for the current year.
On the specific job?
On the specific occupation,
right.
So that they manage it by occupation. So, and whereas the 3 to 5 year, or the 5 year planning model that is mentioned within the response is more in terms of in establishing the needs that the different environments, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army, they sit and they go through each occupation and figure out what they need. But in terms of actually making sure that that target is met, we think that there has to be a longer-term target to be able to deal with the variations. On the pilot side, just for interest, there is no difficulty in getting recruits through the door. What there is difficulty in making sure that they get trained, because it takes a long time to train the pilots.
Oh, exactly. Okay.
And also the retention of pilots. Depending on what is happening externally in terms of the marketplace, they may lose a lot of pilots.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to, which is the retention part of the issue is massive. And I understand the private sector pressures on individual pilots who've been around for a while to move on to other things, and I appreciate that. But I do worry, because what I find striking is that here is a way for a young person to receive a free education, essentially a free career, at a time when education costs, post-secondary costs, are soaring in some of these sectors, especially pilots and technicians and the like. And I just don't find that there's a lot of movement here.
that it seems like they're relying on old ways of doing things. For instance, wait times. Why are these wait times so long?
Okay,
There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think one thing I want to, I guess, sort of touch on, and I'm glad that you raised this particular recommendation and this particular response. Because, you know, again, I think fundamentally what we are trying to get to is the Canadian Armed Forces are 4,000 trained members below the number that they need. And in fact, the problem has gotten worse over the last couple of years. It was about 2,300, now it's 4,300 or something like that, right? So it's gotten worse. These are the numbers that they themselves have said they need. When the three environments get together, Army, Navy, Air Force, when they get together, they identify how many people that they need, and then they pass it over to the recruiting people, and the recruiting people say, well, we don't have the capacity to do that, so we're going to recruit a lower number, okay? So we made a recommendation here, and, you know, I mean, our recommendations are about you need to put the focus on the individual occupations and, you know, all of that type of thing, and we get this type of a response from National Defence. And like you say, when you sort of read that response, you get the feeling that they're essentially saying, well, we've already got this in place. Okay, that's fine. You think you've got something in place, whatever. How is any of this going to get you to the point of having the number of trained members that you need to have, right? So yes, you can you know, look at our recommendation, and you know, the department can look at our recommendation, and they can come back with a with a response that sort of says either what they're going to do or what they're already doing, but none of it's actually telling you whether any of this is going to get you to that, right? The wait times, if I understand, you know, what you're referring to, is the amount of time that in the middle of a training program that a person has to wait around for the rest of their training. Is that sort of the issue? That's the issue that we raised, I guess, in terms of the waiting, was that somebody will come in, they'll start their training program perhaps, you know, and then they have to wait because the next stage isn't ready, and in some cases they'll wait many months. So, you know, and I mean, during that time, the Canadian Armed Forces find something else for those individuals to do. It may be, you know, first aid training or those types of things, but it's not training that's getting them trained for their actual occupation and getting ready to get in the occupation. So again, they need to find ways of making that training more efficient so that there is less waiting time for the recruits coming in.
Just thank you. But just on that, is there any area, and it's maybe a question we ask them, where budgets are put in place based on the expected number of new recruits coming in? So, I mean, to me, I would wonder, why would they put out an objective of so many recruits if they feel that they probably can't meet it? And they must have some idea of what's doable, of what's achievable. Are there other budgets where they can access more resources if they show recruits being higher? Is that a...
Well, again, I think this is, you know, this is a matter of sort of, and you know, I understand, right? National defense is a big, complex piece of business, but they have a strategy. They have the Canada First Defence strategy that lays out what their mission should be. Under those, to do those missions, they've identified how many people that they need. Perhaps, you know, they've done work around what type of equipment that they need. You know, so they've identified that they need, you know, 60,500 trained members, but then they don't have their system set up to get them 60,500 trained members, because the recruiting group doesn't have all of the resources it needs to be able to recruit the number of people that they need to fill those, right? So again, it's a matter of if there have been targets set and objectives set, and particularly when you're dealing with something like national defense, those objectives have been set, then they need to make sure that they can figure out how do they align everything from there on forward, so that they can get those members in order to be able to meet their objectives. And it could even go down into the the support of the equipment as well, right? You know, and the contracts that they put in place there. So there are some constraints around the resources that they have available in the recruiting group. So, you know, really in order to fix this, they need to look at what's the level of resources that we need at the recruiting level, number one, and that may not just be more people, that may be people that know how to recruit people into certain types of occupations. But how do we organize that group so that we will be able to recruit the number that the three environments say that we need?
Thank you. Monsieur Gaudin, vous avez 5 minutes.
5.
Mr. Gaudin, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, we shouldn't paint things as being blacker than they are. Some organizations are successful, and you have done some audits on Crown corporations like the Pacific Pilotage Authority, VRL a few months ago, and you had good comments. The organizations are sound and well controlled. We should use those as inspiration. When we look at Crown corporations, we do have to tell taxpayers that things aren't catastrophic everywhere, but we are trying to improve things. For CRA specifically, in the coming weeks, people will be finding themselves obliged to file an income tax statement. It's stressful for some taxpayers, depending on how they live their lives, and it's disrespectful towards CRA clients when delays to responding to objections are so long. You said that the agency has set a standard of 5 months for settling simple cases. More complex cases, they inform taxpayers that it can take up to 1 year before an appeals officer even calls them. So perhaps it's not a good translation in the report there. Can we interpret this as being a way of discouraging taxpayers so that cases can be eliminated by attrition, wearing them down over time? We did, in fact, see that 65% of cases, in 65% of cases, I should say, the person challenging the decision won. So I don't think it's a question of discouraging taxpayers as such. But we did identify a great many problems within the system. There are cases where the agency does not understand all the problems it has with its own process. And what we observed and with what we've reported, I think the agency will begin to review its process. So what is at the root of this? Aren't there enough people? Aren't there enough human resources? What instruments can the agency establish to make things better? It's going to do a self-assessment after your report. I don't know how long it'll take them to respond, but I think that as an organization, they should have the independence to self-assess, but that's another issue. Have you identified what they could do? Don't they have enough employees? If not, what can we do to help them as parliamentarians? I do think that the agency can improve its processes and procedures. What's essential is an approach of lessons learned. When there is a decision and when that decision changes, when that decision has to be overturned, it's important for CRA to draw lessons for that, to understand why the decision was wrong in the first place and why it had to be overturned. So are there ways of improving the process at the outset in order to reduce the number of wrong decisions that will then be challenged by taxpayers? I think that's the most important thing. to have that kind of feedback at the end of the process, so that the information feeds back into the beginning and people can see why decisions have been overturned, and the process can be improved at the initial stages. So we have to work upstream rather than downstream and take lessons, draw lessons from cases that have already been dealt with. I think that is in itself already a very good solution. I think it's unfortunate that you had to say that people in place didn't self-assess. Let's move to another report, number 5, recruitment and retention at National Defence, the Canadian Armed Forces. The regular forces haven't reached their target of 68,000 members. There was no recommendation made. Why? Generally speaking, we made recommendations on different ways of recruiting forces members in some professional occupations. So what we said in general was, again, that it's important for national defense to identify the occupational groups in which they needed specific measures to achieve the numbers needed. It's the kind of issue that can be resolved with specific stages targeting specific occupational groups within the armed forces. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Gaudin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Or who made who took the decision on this. In terms of Revenue Canada, has there been a certain loss of accountability once it became an agency instead of a department? A direct accountability to ministers, to parliamentarians?
You know, that's not something that that we noticed in any way.
No? Okay.
You know, and I think Revenue Canada has done some, has done some good things. I mean, when you look at sort of some of the work they've done with electronic filing and things like that, right? They have been, looking at other ways to deliver services and that type of thing. So, I can't really do a comparison about sort of before or after or anything like that. But, they certainly still have a lot of work to do to understand sort of the delivery of their services to citizens.
And it's more on the accountability side of it,
Right.
who you are accountable to. As an agency, it's almost as if you have another layer of separation from parliamentarians and government, and you feel that you're somewhat more separate. That's more my question. But I know you didn't probably look at this in the audit.
No, and we didn't. But I think that is an interesting observation because again. What we've brought forward as well are the 3 special examinations. So the special examinations are work that we do in Crown corporations where there is also that governance layer. And when you have those organizations with a governance layer, obviously, as parliamentarians, you are relying on that governing board to make sure that those organizations are doing what they are supposed to do. And certainly when that is functioning the way that it should function, then you will see organizations that are run the right way and that have are achieving good results. We have the special examination of the International Research Development Corporation in here, where again they had good strategic planning and a lot of good approaches. But they were at risk because they were down to a minimum number of board members. And again, as parliamentarians, you're relying on those governing boards to make sure those organizations are being managed the right way. So that governing board layer, if it is operating the right way, and we in no way looked at that in terms of Revenue Canada, but when that governing layer is operating the right way, it actually can be a very good sort of, I suppose, almost comfort to you that, okay, there are people overseeing that organization to make sure it's working the way that it should.
Well, it's something that I'm still curious about Revenue Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's most of the questions, but I do want to just kind of close, and I want to thank you for your concluding comments, more specifically in your presentation today, and I want to read them again into the record. And I think it's good for all members of Parliament, all those on this committee, to listen carefully to what the Auditor General said. And he said, to close, and I quote, "I want to go back to my earlier remarks about the frustration of citizens with government programs. One way or another, everything that government does is intended to serve Canadians. As such, departments should do service well, to benefit Canadians both individually and collectively." And then you said it is critical for government departments to understand that their services need to be built around citizens and not just process. As they work to implement our recommendations, I encourage them to take a step back and focus on how they can deliver services that work for Canadians. I want to thank you for that closing statement. As a businessman you know, I have been frustrated with government application for programs. Certainly, and you know, we've kind of picked away at Revenue Canada today, but you know, 900-day waits and months waits for objectives or objections that have been filed. As we go in as a committee to call these departments together, I think it's imperative for us as well to step back, as our Auditor General said, and just run it through the lens of how does this serve the average taxpayer, the average Canadian, the average one who's overwhelmed maybe with paperwork and bookwork, and is it there for them, or is it there as a make-work project for accountants or for others? And so I thank you for these reports, for your report, for your presence here today, and we look forward to meeting again, and as we bring other departments in, hopefully we will have a chance to meet again. So we are now ready to adjourn. Thank you for being here.